Lieutenant Katie Murphy stepped off the transport ship and onto the metal platform of Forward Base Delta. The hot air of the alien planet hit her face like a wave. Around her, soldiers from different worlds moved with purpose. Some had blue skin and extra arms. Others had scales that shined in the sunlight. A few looked almost human but had strange markings on their faces. Katie carried her gear bag over her shoulder. It was heavy, but she was used to the weight. She had packed it carefully, the night before, making sure everything was in its right place. The other human soldiers had laughed when they saw what she brought. They called it old-fashioned. Some said it was stupid. The base was busy with activity. Alien soldiers worked on their weapons, checking energy cells and calibrating targeting systems. Their equipment hummed and beeped with electronic sounds. Holographic displays showed maps and battle plans. Everything looked advanced and expensive. Katie found her assigned quarters and dropped her bag on the narrow bed. She opened it and began taking out her gear. First came her throwing knives. Each one was made of simple steel, sharp and perfectly balanced. She had spent years learning to use them. Next was her compound bow made of carbon fiber and steel cables. It looked primitive next to the plasma weapons she had seen other soldiers carrying. She pulled out her ballistic pistol and checked the magazine. Real bullets, not energy beams. Her rifle was the same. It fired actual metal projectiles using gunpowder. The aliens would probably laugh at it. Most humans carried energy weapons now. They said ballistic weapons were from the past. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Corporal Jake Martinez, another human soldier. He was one of the few people who did not make fun of her weapon choices. "Hey, Katie," Jake said. "Mission briefing starts in 10 minutes. You ready for this?" Katie nodded and grabbed her gear. "As ready as I can be." They walked through the corridors of the base together. Other soldiers passed them, some nodding in greeting. Katie noticed how their weapons looked so different from hers. Energy rifles that glowed with power, plasma cannons that could melt through steel, force shields that could stop almost any attack. The briefing room was large and filled with soldiers. Katie saw Commander Zextar of the Zephyrians standing near the front. He was tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. His people were known for loving technology. They always wanted the newest and most advanced equipment. Captain Vex of the Vortaxi stood beside him. The Vortaxi looked like they were made of living energy. They used weapons that shot beams of pure power. They thought anything that was not energy-based was worthless. Major Ryan Clark, Katie's human commanding officer, waved her over. He looked uncomfortable when he saw her weapons. Katie knew he wished she would use standard military equipment like everyone else. "Murphy," Major Clark said quietly, "are you sure about your gear selection? This is a big mission. Maybe you should consider using standard-issue weapons." Katie shook her head. "I am comfortable with what I have, sir." Commander Zextar noticed their conversation and walked over. His 4 eyes looked at Katie's weapons with obvious disapproval. "Is this human serious about bringing such primitive tools to combat?" "They are not primitive," Katie said calmly. "They are reliable." The commander laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Reliable? These weapons are thousands of years old in design. How can they compete with modern technology?" Other soldiers began to gather around, curious about the discussion. Katie felt their eyes on her and her gear. She heard whispers and quiet laughter. Some pointed at her bow like it was a museum piece. Captain Vex floated closer, his energy form shimmering. Perhaps the human would be better suited for historical demonstrations rather than actual warfare. More laughter filled the room. Katie's face grew red, but she kept her voice steady. "My weapons work when others might fail." "Fail?" Commander Zextar's voice was full of disbelief. "Our technology has never failed us. Your primitive tools cannot match the power of plasma rifles or the accuracy of quantum targeting systems." Major Clark stepped forward, trying to end the embarrassing conversation. "Let's focus on the mission briefing." The room's lights dimmed and a holographic display appeared in the center. It showed a large building surrounded by walls and defensive positions. The target was a Dominion stronghold on the far side of the planet. The Dominion was humanity's enemy, and they had been growing stronger. This facility is heavily defended, Commander Zextar explained. But our superior weapons will make quick work of their defenses. The mission should be simple for soldiers with proper equipment. He looked directly at Katie when he said this. More soldiers chuckled quietly. The briefing continued with detailed plans and strategies. Katie listened carefully, but she also noticed something others seemed to miss. The intelligence reports mentioned strange energy readings around the target. There were hints that the Dominion might have new defensive systems. Katie raised her hand. Sir, what about these energy readings? Could they interfere with our equipment? Commander Zextar waved dismissively. Our technology is far too advanced to be affected by anything the Dominion has created. You worry too much about things that do not matter. But if there are energy-dampening fields, Katie started to say. Enough, the commander interrupted. Your primitive weapons have made you think in primitive ways. Modern warfare requires modern solutions. The briefing ended with assignments and departure times. As soldiers filed out of the room, Katie heard more comments about her gear. Some aliens wondered why humans were even included in advanced military operations. Others suggested she might slow down the mission. Jake Martinez stayed beside her as they left the briefing room. Do not listen to them, he said. You know what you are doing. Katie nodded, but she felt isolated. Everyone thought her weapons were useless. They believed technology would solve every problem. But Katie had learned something different during her training on Earth. She had seen electronic equipment fail at the worst moments. She had watched soldiers become helpless when their advanced weapons stopped working. That night, Katie cleaned and checked her weapons one more time. Each throwing knife was sharp and balanced. Her bowstring was tight and strong. Her bullets were counted and ready. These tools had no electronic parts to break. They would work no matter what happened. Outside her window, alien soldiers practiced with their energy weapons. Bright beams lit up the night sky. Their equipment was impressive, but Katie wondered, what would happen if something went wrong? What if their technology failed when they needed it most? She thought about the mission ahead and the energy readings that had been dismissed so quickly. Something told her that her primitive weapons might be more important than anyone realized. The transport ship flew low over the alien jungle, its engines making a soft humming sound. Katie looked out the window at the strange trees below. They were tall and purple, with leaves that seemed to glow in the planet's dim sunlight. This world was nothing like Earth, but she had learned to adapt to new places. The ship landed in a small clearing several miles from their target. One by one, the soldiers jumped out and began checking their equipment. The alien soldiers moved with confidence, their advanced weapons ready for action. Their gear beeped and flashed with electronic displays. Katie shouldered her pack and checked her weapons one more time. Her throwing knives were secure in their sheaths. Her bow was strung and ready. Everything felt right and familiar. Commander Zextar gathered the team around him. His forearms moved as he pointed to a holographic map floating above his wrist device. We moved through the jungle to reach the target. Our sensors show clear paths and no immediate threats. The team began moving through the thick vegetation. The alien soldiers used their electronic scanners to navigate, following the paths their computers recommended. Katie walked near the back of the group, watching and listening to the jungle around them. She noticed things the scanners missed. The way certain plants moved when there was no wind, the sounds of small animals that went quiet when something dangerous was near, the smell in the air that changed when they were being watched. These were skills she had learned hunting in the forests of Earth. After 2 hours of walking, Katie stopped and held up her hand. Wait, she said quietly. Commander Zexistar looked back with annoyance. What is it now, human? Our sensors show nothing. Katie pointed to an area of thick bushes ahead. Something is hiding there. I can tell by the way the leaves are positioned. The commander checked his scanner again. There is nothing. Your primitive senses are unreliable. But Captain Vex moved closer to investigate. His energy form could sense heat and movement better than most. After a moment, he turned back to the group. The human is correct. There are 6 Dominion soldiers in those bushes. The alien soldiers quickly took positions and opened fire. Plasma beams and energy bolts lit up the jungle. The hidden enemies were destroyed before they could react. The advanced weapons made quick work of them. "See how easy that was with proper technology," Commander Zextar said to Katie. "Your old-fashioned methods are not needed." The team continued moving toward their target. Katie kept watching the jungle, but she also began studying the sky. The wind patterns were changing. Clouds were moving in from the east. The air pressure felt different. A storm was coming, but the electronic weather sensors had not detected it yet. Corporal Martinez fell into step beside her. "You are being very quiet," he said. Katie pulled out a pair of old-fashioned binoculars and scanned the horizon. "Something does not feel right. The weather is changing, and those energy readings from the briefing keep bothering me." Jake looked at her binoculars with curiosity. "Why do you use those instead of digital scopes?" "They do not need batteries," Katie replied. "They work even when electronics fail." Through her binoculars, Katie could see their target in the distance. The Dominion stronghold was large and well defended. Walls surrounded the main building and guard towers stood at each corner. But she noticed something the computer analysis had missed. The walls were built with a slight lean inward at the top. This created a blind spot that the defensive weapons could not cover. There was also a pattern in the guard rotations that the electronic surveillance had not detected. The defenders were human, and they followed human habits. "Jake," she said, handing him the binoculars. "Look at the northeast corner of the wall, see how it curves?" Jake studied the area through the old lenses. "Yeah, I see it. The defensive guns cannot hit anything close to that section." Katie nodded. "And watch the guards. They change positions every 20 minutes, but there is a 3-minute gap when that area is not watched." "How did you notice that?" Jake asked. "I watched them for an hour," Katie explained. "The computers only analyzed the last few minutes of surveillance data." They reached the forward observation post as the sun began to set. The alien soldiers set up their electronic equipment, scanning the target with various sensors and scanners. Holographic displays showed the stronghold from multiple angles. Katie asked Commander Zextar for permission to move closer and scout the area using traditional methods. She wanted to get a better look at the defensive positions and guard patterns. "Absolutely not," the commander said firmly. "Our sensors provide far better intelligence than anything you could gather crawling around in the dirt." Katie tried to explain what she had observed about the blind spots and guard rotations, but the alien soldiers were not interested. They trusted their electronic systems completely. Their computers had analyzed every detail of the target, and they believed that was enough. As night fell, Katie noticed something troubling. The communication systems began experiencing brief moments of static. The holographic displays flickered occasionally. The targeting computers sometimes took longer to lock onto targets during practice runs. "Sir," Katie said to Major Clark, "there might be some kind of interference affecting our equipment." The major checked his devices and frowned. "There does seem to be some minor glitching, but it is probably just atmospheric interference from the storm." Katie looked up at the darkening sky. The storm was still hours away, but the electronic interference was happening now. This was not natural weather interference. This was something else. She tried to talk to Commander Zextar about her concerns, but he was busy planning the assault with the other alien officers. They were confident that their superior technology would overwhelm any defenses the Dominion could mount. "Tomorrow we attack at dawn," the commander announced. "Our energy weapons will destroy their barriers, and our advanced targeting systems will eliminate all resistance. This will be a simple demonstration of technological superiority." Katie spent the night checking her weapons and equipment one more time. She counted her throwing knives and made sure each one was properly sharpened. She tested her bowstring and counted her arrows. Everything was ready. Around midnight, she noticed that the electronic interference was getting worse. Radio communications cut out for several seconds at a time. The holographic displays showed random static. Some of the energy weapons had trouble maintaining their charge levels. Jake Martinez noticed the problems too. "This is getting worse," he whispered to Katie. "What do you think is causing it?" Katie had been thinking about this all evening. I think the Dominion has some kind of jamming technology, maybe something that interferes with advanced electronics. Should we tell the commanders? Jake asked. Katie looked at the alien officers who were still confident in their battle plans. They had dismissed every concern she had raised. They would not listen to warnings about their precious technology failing. They would not believe us, Katie said. We can only be ready for whatever happens. As dawn approached, Katie made her final preparations. She strapped her throwing knives to her belt and across her chest. Her bow and arrows were secured to her pack. Her ballistic weapons were loaded and ready. The alien soldiers prepared their energy weapons and activated their targeting systems. Their equipment hummed with power and glowed with ready lights. Everything looked impressive and advanced. But Katie noticed that the electronic interference was stronger than ever. Static filled the communication channels. The holographic displays kept flickering and showing incorrect information. Something bad was about to happen, and only Katie seemed to realize it. The attack was about to begin, and Katie had a feeling that her primitive weapons would soon be the only ones that still worked. The morning sun rose over the jungle as Commander Zextar gave the signal to attack. The Joint Task Force moved toward the Dominion stronghold with confidence. Their advanced weapons hummed with power, and their targeting systems locked onto defensive positions. Katie followed behind the main group, her simple weapons ready but seemingly unimportant. The alien soldiers moved like they were certain of victory. Their technology had never failed them before, and they saw no reason to worry now. The first part of the assault went exactly as planned. Plasma beams from the Zephyrian weapons cut through the outer barriers like paper. Energy bolts from the Vortaxi soldiers destroyed guard towers in seconds. The defensive walls began to crumble under the advanced firepower. "See how easy this is," Commander Zextar called out to his troops. "Superior technology always wins." The Dominion defenders tried to fight back with their own weapons, but they seemed outmatched. Their energy shields collapsed under the alien assault. Their defensive guns could not target the attacking force accurately. Within minutes, the outer defenses were completely destroyed. Katie watched the battle but felt uneasy. Something was wrong, but she could not explain what it was. The electronic interference she had noticed the night before was getting stronger. Static filled the communication channels more frequently, and the holographic displays flickered constantly. The task force pushed deeper into the stronghold. Major Clark's plasma rifle cut down several Dominion soldiers who tried to block their path. Captain Vex's energy beams melted through metal doors like they were made of butter. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. But then Katie saw something that made her blood run cold. Deep inside the stronghold, a massive device was powering up. It looked like a giant antenna surrounded by spinning rings of metal. Energy crackled around it as it began to rotate faster and faster. "Sir," Katie shouted to Commander Zextar, "that device looks dangerous. We should—" Her words were cut off by a brilliant flash of light. The device in the stronghold's center released a massive pulse of electromagnetic energy that spread out in all directions. Katie felt the wave pass through her like a cold wind, but it did not hurt her. The effect on the alien soldiers was immediate and devastating. Every piece of advanced technology stopped working at once. Plasma rifles went dead in the middle of firing. Energy shields collapsed completely. Targeting computers went dark, leaving soldiers blind to incoming threats. Commander Zextar stared at his weapon in shock. All four of his arms pulled at different controls, but nothing responded. The sophisticated rifle that had been cutting through enemies moments before was now just an expensive piece of metal. "What happened?" Major Clark shouted as his own plasma rifle failed. He pressed every button and switch, but the weapon remained dead. Around him, other soldiers were having the same problem. Captain Vex began to flicker and fade. His energy-based body was being disrupted by the electromagnetic field. He tried to maintain his form, but he was becoming weaker by the second. His powerful energy weapons could no longer function. The Chronari soldiers, with their cybernetic enhancements, began stumbling and falling. The electronic parts of their bodies had shut down, leaving them partially paralyzed. Some could not see because their artificial eyes had stopped working. Others could not walk because their mechanical legs would not respond. Katie looked around at the chaos and realized what had happened. The Dominion had used an electromagnetic pulse weapon followed by an energy-dampening field. Every advanced electronic device in the area had been disabled, but her simple weapons, which had no electronic parts, were completely unaffected. "My rifle still works," she called out, raising her ballistic weapon, "and my bow and knives." But her voice was lost in the confusion as Dominion soldiers poured out of hidden positions. These enemies carried old-fashioned ballistic weapons that were not affected by their own electromagnetic defenses. They had been waiting for this moment when the alien technology would fail. The alien soldiers tried to run, but they were caught in open ground with no cover. Their dead weapons could not fight back against the Dominion assault. Some tried to use their equipment as clubs, but they were not trained for close combat. Jake Martinez pulled out his backup ballistic pistol and began firing at the attacking enemies. His bullets found their targets, but he was only one soldier against dozens. "Katie," he shouted, "we need help." Katie stepped forward and drew her compound bow. She notched an arrow and aimed at the nearest Dominion soldier. The arrow flew straight and true, striking the enemy in the chest. He dropped to the ground immediately. She moved quickly, firing arrow after arrow with deadly accuracy. Each shot hit its target perfectly. The Dominion soldiers began to notice this new threat and turned their weapons toward her. Katie rolled behind a piece of debris and drew 2 throwing knives. She stood up and threw both blades at once. They spun through the air and struck 2 different enemies. The perfectly balanced knives found their marks with fatal precision. "How is she doing that?" Commander Zextar asked in amazement. His sophisticated targeting computer could not work, but Katie was hitting targets with simple weapons and her own skill. More Dominion soldiers appeared from inside the stronghold. They had been hiding, waiting for the electromagnetic pulse to disable the alien technology. Now they moved forward with confidence, knowing their enemies could not fight back effectively. But the real terror came from above. Hidden hangars in the stronghold began opening, and massive gunships rose into the air. These aircraft were designed specifically to hunt down enemies who had been disabled by the electromagnetic field. The gunships were huge and heavily armored. Their weapons could destroy entire groups of soldiers with single shots. They moved slowly through the air, searching for targets on the ground below. Katie looked up at the approaching aircraft and felt a chill. These gunships were the real threat. Even if she could handle the ground forces with her weapons, she had no way to fight something flying high above. "We need to run," Major Clark shouted. He tried to use his radio to call for help, but all communications were dead. They were trapped with no way to escape and no way to call for backup. The first gunship lined up for an attack run. Its weapons began charging with a deep humming sound. Katie could see the energy building up in the aircraft's gun systems. In seconds, it would fire and destroy half the task force. She looked around desperately for some kind of cover or escape route. The other soldiers were trying to hide behind pieces of wreckage, but the gunship's weapons would cut through any protection they could find. Commander Zextar, his forearms shaking with fear, looked at Katie with desperate eyes. Can your primitive weapons do anything against that?" Katie stared up at the massive aircraft hovering above them. It seemed impossible that her simple throwing knives could damage something so large and well-armored. But she had to try something or they would all be killed. The gunship's weapons finished charging and Katie could see the pilot preparing to fire. She had only seconds to act before the devastating attack began. Everything depended on what happened next. She reached for her best throwing knife, the one she had been saving for the most important moment. It was perfectly balanced and sharp enough to cut through almost anything. But could it possibly bring down a heavily armored gunship? Katie knew she had to try. It was their only hope. Katie took charge as the gunship above them prepared to fire. Around her, alien soldiers with dead weapons looked to her for guidance. She was the only one left with working equipment, and everyone's life depended on what she did next. "Everyone, spread out," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "Find any cover you can and stay low." The soldiers scattered, diving behind chunks of concrete and twisted metal. Katie pulled out her compound bow and notched an arrow. She aimed at the Dominion ground forces who were advancing toward their position. The arrow flew straight and struck a Dominion soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Katie quickly notched another arrow and fired again. This one hit an enemy in the leg, sending him crawling for cover. Jake Martinez crouched beside her, his ballistic pistol ready. "What is the plan?" he asked, firing at an enemy who had gotten too close. "Keep the ground forces back while I figure out how to deal with that gunship," Katie replied, loosing another arrow. "My bow can handle soldiers, but that aircraft is a different problem." She moved quickly from position to position, using her throwing knives when enemies got close. Each blade found its target with deadly accuracy. The perfectly balanced steel cut through armor and flesh alike. Katie had trained for years to achieve this level of skill. Commander Zextar watched in amazement as Katie's primitive weapons proved more effective than any of their advanced technology. "How can she be so accurate without targeting computers?" he asked Captain Vex. The weakened Vortaxi soldier flickered as he tried to maintain his energy form. "She uses her own senses and training. No electronics required." Katie continued fighting the ground forces, but she kept looking up at the gunship above. The massive aircraft was heavily armored and designed to withstand attacks from energy weapons. Its hull was thick metal that could probably stop bullets and arrows without any damage. But Katie had learned something important during her training on Earth. Every machine, no matter how advanced, had weak points. She just had to find them. She studied the gunship carefully as it hovered overhead. The main body was definitely too well armored to penetrate. The weapons systems were protected behind thick shields. The cockpit had reinforced glass that would stop most projectiles. But then Katie noticed something interesting. Behind the main engine intake, there was a small exposed compartment. It looked like it contained some kind of mechanical device, possibly a gyroscope or stabilization system. The compartment was barely visible and only about the size of her fist. "Jake," she called out, while firing another arrow at a ground target, "do you see that small opening behind the engine on the gunship?" Jake looked up and squinted at the aircraft. "Yeah, I think so. What is it?" "I think it is the stabilization system," Katie replied. "If that gets damaged, the gunship might not be able to fly properly." Jake stared at the tiny target, which was at least 100 feet above them. "You are not seriously thinking about hitting that with a throwing knife?" Katie drew one of her best blades and tested its balance. "It is our only chance." The other soldiers heard this conversation and began looking up at the impossible target. Commander Zextar shook his head with all four arms. "That is madness. The target is too small and too far away. Even with our best targeting computers, that would be a difficult shot," Captain Vex added weakly. Major Clark, who had been trying to revive his dead plasma rifle, looked up at Katie with desperation. "Murphy, that gunship is about to fire. Its weapons are almost fully charged. We have maybe 30 seconds. Katie looked around at her teammates. These soldiers who had mocked her weapons just hours before were now depending on those same weapons to save their lives. The irony was not lost on her, but there was no time to think about it. She calculated the shot in her mind. The gunship was moving slowly in a circle above them. The wind was coming from the east at about 10 miles per hour. The target was small and partially hidden behind other parts of the aircraft. But Katie had made difficult throws before. During training, she had hit targets the size of coins from 50 yards away. She had learned to account for wind, distance, and movement. This shot was harder than anything she had attempted, but it was not impossible. "I need everyone to keep the ground forces busy," she said, moving to a position with a clear view of the gunship. "I only get one chance at this." Jake fired his pistol at approaching Dominion soldiers. "Whatever you are going to do, do it fast. That gunship is almost ready to fire." Katie drew her finest throwing knife. It was made from the best steel she could find on Earth, perfectly balanced and sharp enough to cut through almost anything. She had carried this blade through dozens of missions, saving it for the most important moment. The gunship's weapons were glowing brighter as they charged. Katie could see the pilot in the cockpit, preparing to fire on the scattered soldiers below. The massive guns were turning to target the largest group of survivors. Katie focused all her attention on the small target behind the engine. She blocked out the sounds of battle around her, the shouts of her teammates and the growing hum of the gunship's weapons. The world narrowed to just her, the knife, and the tiny mechanical compartment above. She had spent years perfecting her throwing technique. Hours of practice had taught her how to account for every variable that could affect a blade's flight. Wind speed and direction, gravity, the rotation of the planet, even the temperature of the air. The gunship completed another circle and lined up for its attack run. The weapons were almost fully charged, and Katie could see targeting lasers sweeping across the ground below. In seconds, those massive guns would fire and kill everyone who had survived the ground assault. Katie took a deep breath and prepared to make the most important throw of her life. Everything depended on the next few seconds. If she missed, they would all die. If she succeeded, they might have a chance to survive. The knife felt perfect in her hand as she raised her arm. Years of training had prepared her for this moment. Now she had to trust in her skill and hope that her simple steel blade could accomplish what the most advanced weapons could not. Time seemed to slow down as Katie focused on her target. The gunship hung in the air above them, its massive weapons almost fully charged. The small compartment behind the engine looked impossibly far away and tiny. But Katie had trained for moments like this her entire military career. She closed her eyes for a brief second and felt the wind on her face. It was coming from the northeast at about 12 miles per hour. The gunship was moving in a slow circle, traveling from left to right across her field of vision. She would have to lead the target and account for the aircraft's movement. Katie opened her eyes and raised the throwing knife. The blade caught the morning sunlight and gleamed like silver. This knife had been with her through dozens of missions. It had never failed her before, and she prayed it would not fail her now. Around her, the battle continued. Jake Martinez fired his pistol at Dominion soldiers, who were trying to advance on their position. Commander Zextar crouched behind a piece of rubble, his 4 useless arms hanging at his sides. Captain Vex flickered weakly as the energy-dampening field continued to disrupt his form. "Katie," Major Clark shouted, "the gunship is about to fire. Those weapons are almost ready." Katie could see the pilot in the cockpit, his hands moving over controls as he prepared for the attack. The targeting lasers swept back and forth across the ground, searching for the best angle to kill the most soldiers with one shot. She calculated the trajectory one more time. The knife would have to travel over 100 feet through the air. It would need to curve slightly to account for the wind and drop several inches due to gravity. The target was moving, so she would have to throw where it was going to be, not where it was now. Katie had made shots like this before, but never with so much depending on the outcome. If she missed, the gunship would destroy her entire team. There would be no second chance. She drew her arm back and prepared to throw. Years of practice had taught her the perfect form. Her whole body worked together like a machine, transferring energy from her legs through her core and into her throwing arm. The gunship's weapons reached full charge with a deep humming sound that filled the air. Katie could see energy building up in the massive barrels. The pilot began his final targeting sequence, preparing to unleash death on the soldiers below. Katie released the knife with perfect form. The blade spun through the air in a tight spiral, cutting through the wind and gravity with precision. She had thrown it with every ounce of strength and skill she possessed. The knife flew in a perfect arc toward its target. Katie watched it climb higher and higher, spinning end over end as it traveled toward the gunship. For a moment it seemed like the blade would fall short of its target, but Katie had calculated correctly. The knife reached the peak of its flight and began to descend toward the small compartment behind the engine. The spinning blade caught the sunlight as it fell, looking like a silver star against the alien sky. Against all odds, the throwing knife struck true. The sharp steel blade penetrated the small compartment with surgical precision, cutting through the protective covering and striking the delicate gyroscope inside. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The massive gunship began to wobble as its stabilization system failed. The pilot tried to compensate, but without the gyroscope, the aircraft could not maintain level flight. The gunship's weapons, which had been aimed at the soldiers below, discharged into the empty sky as the aircraft spun out of control. Bright beams of energy shot harmlessly into the clouds as the pilot fought desperately to regain control. She did it, Jake shouted in amazement. She actually brought down a gunship with a throwing knife. The massive aircraft continued to spin and wobble through the air. The pilot's control systems were useless without the stabilization mechanism. The gunship began to lose altitude as it spiraled toward the ground. Commander Zexitar stared up at the falling aircraft with all four of his eyes wide with shock. That is impossible. How can a primitive blade destroy such advanced technology? Katie watched as the gunship crashed into the central building of the Dominion stronghold with a tremendous explosion. The impact destroyed the facility's power, core, and sent flames shooting high into the air. Secondary explosions followed as fuel tanks and ammunition stores caught fire. The electromagnetic dampening field, which had been powered by the stronghold's central core, suddenly collapsed. All around the battlefield, advanced technology began coming back online. Plasma rifles hummed back to life, energy shields reformed, and targeting computers reactivated. But the battle was already over. The surviving Dominion soldiers, seeing their main base destroyed and their secret weapon neutralized, began throwing down their weapons in surrender. They had counted on the electromagnetic field to keep them safe from advanced alien technology. Now that it was gone, they knew they had no chance. Captain Vex's energy form solidified as the dampening field disappeared. His natural glow returned, and he floated over to where Katie stood. Human, that was the most remarkable display of skill I have ever witnessed. Commander Zextar approached more slowly, his sophisticated weapon systems coming back online. But he was not looking at his equipment, he was staring at Katie with something that looked like respect. "I owe you an apology," the commander said, his voice much quieter than before. "I was wrong about your weapons. I was wrong about primitive technology. You saved all our lives with tools I thought were useless." Major Clark walked over and picked up Katie's throwing knife from the wreckage of the gunship. The simple steel blade was still sharp and undamaged, despite penetrating the aircraft's armor and causing its destruction. "How did you make that shot?" he asked, examining the knife with new appreciation. Even our best targeting computers would have had trouble with a target that small and that far away. Katie took the knife back and cleaned the blade on her uniform. "I have been practicing with throwing knives since I was 12 years old. I learned to hunt with a bow before I ever touched an energy weapon. These tools work the same way they have worked for thousands of years." She looked around at the alien soldiers who were now studying her simple weapons with interest instead of mockery. Technology is useful, but it can fail. Skills and training never become obsolete. The Chronari soldiers, their cybernetic systems restored, gathered around Katie to ask questions about human combat techniques. They wanted to know how she had learned to be so accurate without electronic assistance. "We would like to learn these methods," one of them said. "Our people have forgotten many traditional skills in favor of technology." Jake Martinez smiled as he watched the conversation. "Looks like your primitive weapons are not so primitive after all." Katie sheathed her knife and shouldered her bow. "They never were. People just forgot that simple does not mean ineffective." As the task force prepared for extraction, reports began coming in from the alien homeworlds. Military commanders wanted detailed information about human traditional weapons training. They had realized that depending entirely on advanced technology left them vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack they had just survived. Katie was recommended for the highest military honors, not for using advanced weapons, but for proving that human ingenuity and traditional skills could overcome any obstacle. The shot that brought down the gunship became legendary among military circles. But Katie was already thinking about the next mission. She cleaned and sharpened her knives, checked her bowstring, and counted her arrows. These simple tools had served her well, and they would be ready when she needed them again. The other soldiers watched her prepare her gear with new understanding. They had learned that sometimes the oldest methods were the best methods. In a universe full of advanced technology, there was still room for simple steel and human skill. As they waited for transport back to base, Katie taught some of the alien soldiers basic knife-throwing techniques. They were eager students, grateful to learn skills that would work even when their technology failed. The lesson was clear. No matter how advanced civilization became, there would always be value in the simple, reliable methods that had served. warriors for thousands of years. Katie's throwing knife had proven that beyond any doubt.